few opening comments, a reminder of long-range plan, what we do, why we do it, and how we go about doing our long-range planning. We've been using this format since 2009, and it has driven great successes throughout this organization. As a reminder, the long-range plan is an opportunity for the council, the staff, and the community to discuss issues that we're facing now that will affect our long-term future, and to really put in place strategies and solutions to address those things. So our long-range plan is financially focused and outcome-driven. What does that mean? It means it's a combination of strategic planning and financial planning. So throughout this process, we will sometimes be talking in terms of budgets and finance and dollars, and sometimes be talking about desired outcomes, long-range things, vision, objectives for our community. During long-range planning, we identify trends and issues that we face now that affect the long-term future of this village. So it has a very real element to it, and it has a far-sightedness element to it as well. We like to say we consider issues now that affect us in 4 years and still will be affecting us in 40 years. Once we've identified those trends and issues, we work together as a team to identify general solutions and strategies to those issues. Oftentimes those solutions or strategies are things like, well, clearly we have an issue, and over the next several months we'll put together a team to work on these things. Our long-range plan also includes a work plan, or council-identified priorities. It sets the work plan for this council. It's a 2-year work plan, often consisting of about 10 to 15 work items that we've identified as council priorities. This plan is used on a daily basis by our staff leaders, our staff team members. We refer to it as we go about making day-to-day decisions. And it is the key driver to the preparation of annual budgets. In fact, you may hear Mayor Tully say at the budget time, well, there's no new issues here because we've talked about these issues in long-range planning. Speaking of that, there's a variety of work types of work that we all do as council members, as staff members, and we've used in previous meetings this idea of a flight analogy, where sort of the high-level work is characterized as flying the plane at 50,000 feet, and then day-to-day service interactions are characterized as runway interactions. Well, we are now operating for purposes of long-range planning right at the 30,000 and 40,000 foot levels, goals and objectives, and council priorities. So that in a nutshell is our long-range plan process. I want to talk a little bit about our schedule. We do long-range planning over the course of the summer. We have 5 meetings planned, starting here tonight, June 2nd, and then 2 meetings in July and 2 meetings in August. At the July meetings, we will address our general operations, our general fund, day-to-day operating activities. We'll identify trends and issues, strategies, and solutions that affect our general fund. On July 21st, we'll do the same thing, only this time focusing on infrastructure, streets, sidewalks, stormwater system, village-owned buildings, also known as facilities. All of these types of things get discussed in some detail on July 21st. Then on August 4th, we've identified an issue that we've all been talking about as a community and certainly as a council and staff team over the last several months. And that's the issue of increased real estate development pressures on our neighborhoods. The economy has definitely improved, and we're facing all sorts of land use and planning and zoning type issues that have come before this council. It is at the August 4th meeting that we've earmarked to discuss those types of trends and issues. And on August 18th, the last of the meetings, we kind of pull all these things together and come up with our 2-year work list, also known as council high priority action items. It is at this meeting those final actions are identified and prioritized. We put all of this together, and in September, just before we produce the draft 2016 budget, we present the plan to the council for acceptance. Tonight is the introduction to this process which I just gave. Also, new to this long-range planning, we've added an element this year, and that is we have a new council, and we want to have the opportunity for each council member to really just express to other council members in the community what's on your mind related to long-range planning. We've identified a couple of 3 key questions you may want to consider as you address the council in an open forum. What do you hope to accomplish with this year's long-range planning? How do you define success in terms of long-range planning? And what issues are you expecting us to discuss as we make our way through the summer, culminating in the creation of our priority action items? That is the, most of tonight's meeting will be spent on this Village Council open forum roundtable where we hope to just learn more about what each council member is on planning issues. And then at the end of the meeting, we want to review our existing goals that have been in place since 2010 and make any modifications to those goals if necessary. Mayor, I'm going to hand it over to you for roundtable, and Mike Baker and I will be your scribes writing these ideas as we hear them on the whiteboards.
Terrific. Thank you for the introduction, Dave. Just want to underscore a couple things. One, the purpose of tonight is, as Dave described, is to have a conversation with the members of this constituted council, because we have a different council as we do every 2 years. There are differences. But we have new members of this council who didn't participate in long-range planning previously. So really what we want to do here tonight is to hear what everyone has on their mind in terms of things that they would like to accomplish, both in the short term and then in the long term. And it's really an invitation to share your ideas. Some of you have already done this. Some of us have already exchanged some ideas and projects and things we would like to accomplish, whether it's ordinance rewrites or particular other goals and objectives. But what I would like is for everyone to sort of share what's on their mind. What have they been thinking? What would they like to achieve? What would they like to accomplish? Again, both short term, and by short term I would say roughly something could be done within the next year. Long term would be something that's going to take multiple years to actually develop and implement to a successful outcome. As part of that, I don't want to necessarily at this point have a discussion on the merits of those ideas. I really want to encourage everyone to get their ideas and goals and objectives out. So at this stage, I don't want to debate what the merits are. We're probably not equipped to do that, particularly for those of us who are hearing something perhaps for the first time. As we were discussing earlier, probably not best equipped to start judging or gauging the wisdom, the practicality, or even the feasibility of the idea. What this will allow is for our scribes to sort of get them down, and then we can, if possible, determine whether or not there's something that can be done and is achievable. In that same vein, I would also ask that we don't try to prioritize the importance of any particular idea, but let's just get them out. We can prioritize later, determining what the consensus of the council is about what we're doing. Prioritization will probably be a slightly different exercise. What I would like, though, is if there's a need for clarification as well. I don't understand what you mean by having a free milk program in Downers Grove. If no one knows what that means, then we might want to at least ask someone, what do you mean by that? But I really want to encourage everyone just to sort of, here's kind of what I would like to do, short term, long term. Again, some of us have already shared some ideas. I'm sure we'll hear those. But I'm going to try just to listen a lot to one another, hopefully, and make sure that we understand what the ideas are, understand what the goals are, and then we can move at a later point in time once we have an opportunity to have more information in terms of what's actually wise, practical, feasible, and then what kind of prioritization vis-a-vis the other things that we have to do as an organization. To sort of kick that off, I think at least for the first round, not that this is, I know it's a round table, but let's do a first round, just give everybody so their opportunity to speak. I'm going to suggest that we implement the hazing procedure that we talked about and make all the newly elected council members go first. And of course, of that group, understanding that chivalry is not dead, ladies always go first. So why don't we just start off, and this doesn't mean that if you don't get out your idea in the first round that you're forever foreclosed, but just to sort of get the ball rolling, Gina, if you wouldn't mind sort of sharing with us what's on your mind.
Well, I think the police station is really important. You know, from what I understand, the facilities project and the police station has been something that has been discussed and talked about for a very long time, many years. I think that, you know, something needs to be done, and I think that this council should work on it. You know, if it's only 2 years, but I think we need a new police station. I'm not sure about the facility, the Village Hall project. You know, I think that's also something we need to look at. You know, and the other really important thing for me is the stormwater fee. I want that to be put back into our taxes. I don't think the fee is the right way to go. And I would like to see that done, discussed, moved, you know, maybe phased out into some kind of process. you know, and those are the two big ones for me, I think. You know, and I would really like to see those things happen while I'm on this council. I know 4 years isn't a long time, but, you know, not just talk about it, but actually do something about it. That's what I have.
All right, very good. Thank you. I'll move over to Bill White.
Yeah, so which bill here? Well, I agree with both priorities that Gina raised. I think those are issues that we need to address in the next 2 years. In addition, I very much want us to start and complete the 5-year review of the comprehensive plan. And to be very specific, I think it'd be really cool. It may not be feasible, it'd be very cool if we could vote to adopt the update on the 50th anniversary of it first being adopted, which would be October 4th, 2016. It was first adopted October 4th, 2011. So it's a sentimental thing, probably doesn't really matter substantively, but I think that would be cool. That'd give us a year, basically, to get that done. I think a lot of things can flow into that. If you want to make bullet points under that, I guess to talk about developing consensus regarding the proper role of village government and human services, what tools we're willing to use to accomplish historical preservation and what our goals are, what tools we're willing to use and how we can accomplish tree preservation, and this probably deserves all the show.
Is that last one voting?
Basically, historic preservation and tree preservation are basically the same general concept. What are our goals, and what tools are we willing to use? Just to toss out, for example, as a matter of village policy, are we willing to help private people fund the moving of houses? That's a strategic decision that needs to be made on a policy level. People disagree, so we need to talk about it and work it out. On a separate line. If you're here in 2013, I raised this as a member of the public. I want us to provide better strategic, more specific strategic direction to our economic planning efforts, and specifically re-emphasize the importance of sales tax to our economic base. I want that to be an explicit, definite reason. I'm not going to advocate for it now, other than just offer a couple of points. If we fall behind other communities in sales tax, the money doesn't stay in our homeowners' pockets. If we charge less in property tax, your bill is smaller. My bill is smaller. We have more money to spend. If we fall behind in sales tax, it's not because people are spending less in tax dollars. It's because they're spending it in another community. And the statistics are very clear that over the last 10 years, we have fallen behind Chicagoland in a rather alarming way. In 2005, we were the 6th ranked community amongst the top 20 Chicago suburbs. This year, we factor in our sales tax rebates, we're 16th. We're leaving a lot of money on the table. Can we fix it? What's feasible, what isn't? I don't know. I'm not an economic development expert. But I do want us to take a very hard look at that over the next 2 years. I want us to review the sign ordinance. That flows into a lot of things. It flows into economic development, potentially. And then, let's see. Last time there was developed the right-of-way improvement standards. The curb and gutter, Florence Avenue potentially fits into that. That's now we're getting priority. So I think I gave you a pretty comprehensive list of what I'd like to do in the next 2 years.
Thank you. Bill Waldeck.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll try and keep it at 50,000 feet, but if I start hitting the runway, just ask me to pull up. Most of what I have has already been touched upon. Facilities, specifically the police station. I'm not in favor of moving it to Ogden, but there are other choices. Secondly, and these aren't in priority order, but to eliminate the stormwater fee, put it on a slow timeline for, put on taxes, slow timeline on projects, discourage development and help PDAs, might be a additional wrinkle in there. We have our zoning issues. I already gave a list to staff, so if you want, you can ask them for the whole list. Specifically, the south side sections between 71st and the shopping center. It needs to be, I think it needs to be looked at and possibly rezoned like the rest of the immediate area. Sign ordinance review, historic preservation, and address, part of that would be addressing ownership outside the village. We worry about private property rights. What happens when the private property is owned, let's say, by a bank in Mississippi or something? So there should be ways around that. The comprehensive plan update, I agree with that. We need to get to that. I'm worried about the tree canopy. We need to add and retain our trees, private property trees. I mentioned possibly using the consortium that we use to get breaks on trees, possibly expanding that to private property, which we could set regulations on, and so we have a definite interest in the private property trees bought through the consortium. Permits, I'm beginning to hear a lot about the permit process. I think we need to, we did a comprehensive study of that some years ago, specifically when David first joined the village. I think he was deputy village manager at the time, so I think maybe we need to review our performance on permits. Economic development, I agree with Commissioner White. We need to try and do something about our tax base. Planning in general, public works, we need to address stormwater, streets versus sidewalks, new versus maintenance. We'll get into that, was it next month or the month after? Boards and commissions, I'd like to see more activity, more use of boards and commissions. The idea was at some point to have some sort of an incubator process. Well, that's what boards and commissions are for. Give them the freedom to come up with ideas. And neighborhood involvement and communication, that was part of TCD3. It kind of got wiped out, that discussion. And I think we've been hearing a lot about the importance of neighborhoods and neighborhoods getting together. So we need to foster neighborhood improvement and communication. I would like to also address the homeless issue not necessarily looking for resolution, because we all know the odds of that, but just getting all the entities on the same page, namely the village, our police, our library, our pad sites, our park district, so that everybody's working together with the same basic plan. Review of the ethics ordinance, and I'll leave it at that. And also any ideas that we can have to address the possibility of the state taking away our possibility of property taxes. If we can migrate any of that into reasonable fees. Call it, I don't know, I jokingly to staff called it the governor fee. If he takes away our property taxes, our ability to raise money through property taxes that we need for our public safety, we have to find other ways of getting that revenue. And that's what I have, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Greg?
Thank you, Mayor. I suspect there will be a couple of new things, but this will be largely repetitive. I guess I'll start with what Gina started with, the facilities plan. I've always said the police station was the first priority for me. Village Hall and other ones come a little bit later. That said, I think it is important that we still consider Ogden Avenue. I think there are tremendous benefits to moving the police station out of downtown. I'm going to go advocate now because it's kind of what I do. Number one, there's a big public safety benefit to it. We've seen train derailments of oil tankers a handful of times now in the last couple of years. We saw one of them in Illinois not long ago. And God forbid something like that happen here, but to have our 911 dispatch center right on the train line, potentially in ground zero for a disaster like this, which could hamper our public safety response, is unacceptable to me. I would like to see that rectified, and the way you do that is to move the dispatch center. If it's going to remain in the PD, and now that's a question that obviously needs to be answered, I think you've got to move the PD. It comes along with other side benefits, economic development potential on Ogden Avenue, economic development potential downtown, other side benefits that I won't go all the way down the rabbit trail. Suffice it to say, I'm in favor of looking at Ogden Avenue. We've heard a lot about stormwater. It sounds like we may not be keeping the fee, but if we do, back during the previous council, I had floated the idea of increasing the incentives for certain green projects like rain barrels, permeable pavers, dry wells, things of that nature. I've been waiting for an analysis from staff. We got it back, and I think what it's boiled down to is lifting the cap on the one rain barrel piece of the incentive so you can get multiple incentives for multiple rain barrels. And then a $1,000 credit for the installation of permeable pavers, a rain garden, dry wells, or another green project that meets certain size requirements and is installed that's not required under the code. So if you're adding on and you go over, I think it's the 750 square foot mark, you'd be required to put in a dry well. But if you're just putting in a patio behind your house and you put in permeable pavers where previously you had something that was concrete, something to that effect, you would get up to $1,000 credit. Depending on the cost of construction, it'd be essentially 50% of the cost of construction up to $1,000. The long and the short of it is you'd end up with approximately a 7-year exemption from your stormwater utility fee if you got the maximum credit. I think that's a pretty good incentive to try to do something green, to take a bit of burden off of the system, while at the same time encouraging that green behavior from our residents. We've made a lot of strides in infrastructure, whether it's stormwater, roads, what have you, and I think we have to continue that. We've gotten our roads from, I think it was about 22, 23% that are failed and in need of reconstruction, to now 1% at the end of the year that'll be failed and in need of reconstruction. We're essentially back to a pay-as-you-go system, which is the way we ought to be. It took a lot of work, took $25 million in bonds, but we're there, and we need to make sure to put the money into the maintenance so that we're not spending 4 times as much reconstructing a road down in the future. Similarly with stormwater, we have to continue to invest. You've got stormwater problems seemingly all throughout town. I was the mystery reader in my daughter's kindergarten class and was asked at the end of reading the book to talk a little bit about what the village did. And I'm struggling with how to relate this to a bunch of 5- and 6-year-olds. And I thought, well, you know, we take care of the police department, fire department, and oh yeah, when rain falls out of the sky, you've got, not all of it can get soaked into the ground, and so you've got storm sewers, you've got culverts, things like that, so you don't have a bunch of water in your basement. And half the class or more started talking about, oh, I remember when we had this much water in our basement. And it goes to show you that, you know, this is an issue that even the little kids understand. Nobody wants water in their basement. They don't want to have to throw away, you know, everything they had down there. It costs a lot of money. It causes a big hassle. And you know, we have, unfortunately, a system that, for all intents and purposes, isn't really a system. We've got pieces here and pieces there, depending on when town was developed. And we need to take greater steps. We've got a plan for that was put in place, and we need to stick to that plan in some way, shape, or form to continue making progress so that fewer of our residents and businesses flood in too moderate a rain event. So I think this is one place where we need to continue to invest. In order to do the investments in stormwater in order to invest in our facilities and put them into a condition that we need them to be in. We have to protect our AAA bond rating. And so that, I think, has to be paramount. A lot of things are going to flow from that. So that requires us to continue to be fiscally responsible, to stretch our tax dollars as far as we can, and get the best value for our tax dollars. Which leads me to my next point. I'd like to review our contracting policy. I want to make sure that we get the best bang for our construction dollar. I think we need to make sure that we're engaging qualified contractors who hire qualified employees. Because of that, I want to look at redefining the definition of responsible bidder under our current purchasing policy. I think we need to perform additional research into contractors, including litigation searches, things like that. There are myriad ways that a contractor can have something go sideways and cause administrative burden for the village, and I want to protect against that. Going a little closer to the runway, I'd like to eliminate the requirement for type 2 construction in our downtown area. It's not the first time you've heard that from me. Want to make sure that we are in a position to encourage redevelopment in our downtown of commercial areas that currently are not in a position to be redeveloped. We've had folks come to us tell us that the costs are simply too high. I want to make sure that that's not going to continue to be an issue, and that at least we've done what we can. Comprehensive plan, zoning ordinance review, historic preservation ordinance, I think are absolute musts. Not the first time you've heard that from me. Like the comprehensive plan goal for 10-4-16, I like that. I think that has a nice little synergy to it. I think along with the comp plan has to come the zoning ordinance, because that's where the rubber meets the road. And we've seen what can happen when you've got unforeseen loopholes in the code. Sign ordinance review, right-of-way standards, and I think the time for that right-of-way standards conversation has come. We've seen it with Clyde Estates, certain people in favor of curb and gutter, other people aren't, and we're seeing it again with Florence Avenue. And I think it's time to have that conversation community-wide. Getting a little closer to the runway, sign ordinance review, the solid waste contract. It was mentioned, back during the first meeting in May, I think it was Mark Toman talked about recycling downtown. If we're going to be re-upping our solid waste contract, let's try to get recycling bins downtown. I'd also like to look at curbside collection of organic waste. I think it's a way to encourage additional green behavior. We've got vehicles that are running on biodiesel. The sanitary district is doing more and more with their generator. There might be ways to partner with them to take care of some of that waste. That probably about does it. If I've missed anything, Dave, you've got my notes. But thanks for putting up with the long-winded comments.
No, thank you for giving it that much thought in advance. And I don't want to discourage anybody from asking any questions or anyone to clarify an understanding of what anyone's talking about. I don't think anything has required clarification to this point, but I just want to make sure that people don't feel constrained from asking for clarifying questions. Bob?
It's one of the values of going fifth here is that there's a lot that's already been touched on. All of the things that I've seen and heard here are things that I think we should be talking about. Every one of them, in my opinion, merits serious consideration by this body for a host of reasons, not all of them to change or to improve, but to affirm perhaps in some instances. I want to underscore something Greg said, though, about that bond rating. In relationship to that, I think we need to have a review of sorts, and maybe it's a subcommittee even, as opposed to a priority action item. But the concept of service levels is one that I think merits consideration. A lot of what we do, 80% of what we do, stems from an assumption that his existing service levels need to be at least maintained. And that may be true, but if it's not, if there are opportunities for service levels to be perhaps downgraded, or situations where the public is demanding the service levels be upgraded, it would have an enormous impact on everything we do, from whether it's contracts, to debt levels, to, as Commissioner Waldeck was talking about, other alternative revenue sources. That service level question is one that we seldom really get into independent of budgeting. And so it's a little bit of a chicken and egg. We kind of default to existing or improving service levels as they stand today, which drives budgeting, but perhaps there'd be service levels that demand improvement or perhaps reduction. So I don't know how to work that in because it's a pretty big subject, but I think if we don't touch on it, we drive ourselves into some decisions that maybe we could improve upon. And to that end, one thing I think we should try and find a way to do in the next 24 months, that's what we're sort of looking at here, is put together some sort of a substantial survey for our residents. I think it's been a little while since we've done that, and subject after subject is batted around over fences, over cocktails, after church in the parking lot, but seldom is it kind of collected for this body to consider and use in terms of deciding service levels or budgeting priorities. So I'd like to see us do that. And I guess when I say that, I don't really mean the 7 of us dreaming up 10 questions each. I mean a little bit more of a scientific survey that we get some help developing that touches on a lot of what we do. Perhaps, I'd like to say everything that's not possible, but a much broader spectrum than what we might just dream up in a meeting or two. A little more specifically to, I guess, the list itself, the right-of-way standards thing is something that's been on my list for some time, and I really think is important, whether it's time has come or it's time came a while ago. I suppose it depends on your perspective. But it's a subject that is, again, if we look back over the last 6 years of meetings, the number of times that the residents come to talk to the council about subjects, the number of those, a percentage of those that involve one way, shape, or form right-of-way standards, if we consider right-of-ways to essentially be sidewalk to sidewalk, is huge. Taxes, traffic, I don't know what else, right-of-way standards is pretty high up on that list in terms of the number of times that it's repeated by residents as being an issue to them. And so I'd like us to vet through that, as the mayor mentioned in his, was it State of the Village, Mayor? Talked about starting to make a little progress on that, and I think we need to be through that subject matter. Zoning, I'm going to say that a little differently. I don't know if my colleagues meant the same thing, but there's zoning ordinances that we have, which I think there's some desire to change, and certainly I have some desire too. But the map itself, touched on this a couple weeks ago at one of our meetings. There are situations with our map, I think we need to consider a review of the map independent of any particular requests for zoning parcel changes, classification changes. There are situations that are going to bite us. I mentioned it to my colleagues in an email a little while ago. There's a couple on Maple Avenue, for instance, where we will find ourselves in exactly the same mess we found ourselves in for 6 months if we don't take a proactive stance on adjusting zoning. So I'd like to get into that map issue. We don't tend to do it sort of at our own volition. I think we should rethink that. And then the last thing is a communication issue. Bill talked about communication, and it's like motherhood and apple pie. We always talk about communication. It seems like we always fail to some degree. We never quite get there on communication. So I don't know if there's a way to do it, but some sort of a, who mentioned it tonight? I don't remember. One of you guys mentioned it tonight, but the idea that there'd be periodically, I think it was Connie that mentioned it, maybe. Can we go home? Talks put together, and I don't know if they're through DG6 on YouTube or if they're mailers or if they're a combination of them, but start to talk about some of these either policy or technical issues independent of a particular decision, so that the residents have an opportunity to understand. And we've tried it occasionally with our property tax bills. Success has been mixed, but there's a lot of things that this group ends up knowing over time that affect decisions that the general public never gets a chance to understand. And I think we need to do our part more than we're doing now to just have, civics classes. That's a bad description because there's a civics bill in Springfield. What does it mean to have curb and gutter, and why does it cost so much more, and what is the functional difference as it relates to stormwater? Independent of any particular neighborhood's discussion, so that residents have an opportunity to understand that. So I don't know how to frame that up, except the communication right now is mostly in response to things or pretty generic about what's happening at the village. And then maybe if there was a series of issues accumulated as a function of the survey, perhaps, that then drove, Downers Grove 101 class syllabus for the next 2 years. I think that would be a helpful thing for our residents.
Thanks, Bob. David?
Thank you, Mayor.
My plan is I won't have anything to say.
Well, I appreciate hearing from all my colleagues. It's helpful to hear the priorities that we've all, where we align, where we differ, some new ideas. So I think this is a helpful exercise as a part of this process, especially as we kick off, a more in-depth discussion of a lot of these items, and then come up with our action list. First and foremost item for me is economic development. Economic development is just so crucial to our town, and looking at some of the numbers, and I've looked at some of the numbers that Bill White was referencing earlier with our sales tax. I mean, you look at the top 20 sales tax producing communities in the metropolitan Chicago area, and Downers Grove is the worst performing. We are still not at our 2007 sales level in this community. And that's something that I think we need to work with our Economic Development Corporation to address. And I think some of that, it has to do with the number of policies that we can address at the village level. I think this is a great community. There's a lot that we offer as a community. And we do have some tools that we can help bring shoppers to Downers Grove, keep our own residents shopping in Downers Grove. I think one of them is the Ogden TIF. Ogden TIF, it has a significant amount of money there, and prioritizing bringing new businesses to Downers Grove using a tool like that is something that's crucial to me. I think the permitting process that was mentioned earlier is something that might be something that we look at as when a new business comes to town, or when existing business wants to expand. What are the hurdles that they have to go through to do that? And I think that's something that we need to consider best practices. We need to consider the standards in other towns and our surrounding communities, other communities that they may choose to locate in other than Downers Grove. I think we need to review our sign ordinance as part of this. Signs are one piece of the advertising for a business, but it's often a major piece. And I think this comes down to a community. A business is going to be looking along Ogden Avenue along a stretch, and whether they choose Westmont, Downers Grove, Lyle, or other communities along that stretch, and that's just an example. There are a lot of intangible factors, and whatever we can do to both represent the community's expectations and as well as encourage businesses to choose Downers Grove, I think is very important. And then at the end of the day, all of this economic development activity helps our residents, helps our taxpayers by giving us more choice here in Downers Grove, and allows us to reduce our reliance on property taxes on stormwater utility and other sources of revenue. And like Commissioner White said, people coming in and spending money in Downers Grove benefits our entire community. It's not if we have more sales taxes, that means we're taking money away from our residents. That means we're getting more of the money here in Downers Grove that is going to be spent anyway, whether it's by our own residents or by residents of other communities. So I think that's a very, very important issue for me. Obviously, this facilities issue has been a major issue over the past year. This $52 million for the previous plan, I'm very, very pleased that that's off the table. I think that plan was not representative of what the community wanted. I think it was not something that there was much support for. And I think that starting from square one and starting with a reassessment of our real needs as an organization, in my mind, I think that's where we've got to start, is what are our real needs? Where can we achieve efficiencies using our current resources, using our current infrastructure? What maintenance might be necessary to allow this? And we need to work with the community to leverage their input, leverage their expertise, and make sure this is an open and inclusive process, so that whatever we end up doing, it can be supported by a consensus of the community, I think is the phrase the mayor's used. For me, I could get into a long diatribe of what I think is most important, specifically where location. I don't think tonight's the night to do that, but fundamentally, I'm very pleased the previous plan is off the table. That's a very good thing. And now we can step back and reassess our real needs and our assets currently. The stormwater utility, as some have mentioned, has been an excellent experiment for our community, but I don't think it's a long-term solution that's gotten the community buy-in. We have excluded not-for-profits. It is an item that has been noted several times as a hindrance to commercial developments and to businesses choosing Downers Grove. And there's a lot of folks who just plain dislike it in the community. And so when I'm looking at this, I'm also cognizant of our Springfield friends, the issues there, the issues that we may be facing externally, and recognize that it's not something that we can turn the switch off immediately. So looking at a sustainable way to both continue to fund the important stormwater projects, but do it in a way that is more representative of what the community wants and expects, I think is very important to me. There's been mention of zoning and historic preservation. I believe that's something where we should reflect the community expectations, and Village should encourage the preservation of its own unique character. The unique character of this village is what draws many people to locate here, what draws business to locate here. And so ensuring that our zoning ordinance, our historic preservation ordinance reflect those expectations and that uniqueness is something that's very important to me, and I think it goes hand in hand with this idea of the refresh of the comprehensive plan. And perhaps that's an item that you can package together in sort of a similar work stream, and work together with both a residents and an ad hoc committee again, or however that might be structured, to work on all these issues comprehensively and with the most efficient use of staff time, and so I look forward to more discussion on that. The infrastructure standards, we talked about right-of-way standards, we've talked about infrastructure. I think that providing clear policy direction is important, and providing clear and consistent policy direction is very important, so that residents both understand that policy, understand the reason why that policy exists, and that we can consistently point them. So when a resident comes in and who hasn't been following the process, because many residents, as we know, will not follow this process, will not follow. We could send them 500 mailers, we could make phone calls to them, we could knock on their door, and they still won't pay attention until the day their street's on the list to repave, and the machine's coming down the street. They say, well, why aren't there curb and gutter? We should have standards and clear policies so we can point them directly to those things and those resources in our community. And I think we need to make sure that we are aligned as a governing body on what those standards are. And then the final item I wanted to mention is our partnerships, our intergovernmental partnerships. I think it's very appropriate that Manager Fieldman was recognized this evening recognized by the DuPage mayors and managers last week, but also recognized this evening for his work with intergovernmental cooperation, especially in the municipal realm. I think there's a lot of ways that we have worked together with the school districts in this area, with the park district, other units of government. I think that's something we need to continue as we look at issues like the homeless population, which is something Commissioner Waldeck mentioned, working with other governments, because that is an issue that's going to involve the schools and perhaps involve the human services that the township provides, or other units of government. So working through issues like homeless population, like social services or human services, and making sure that we're collaborating and communicating amongst local governments. We're in an era of consolidation, cooperation, collaboration. These C words are used frequently, and I think that's something where residents are looking for at us to be the most efficient government possible. And they're looking not just at us at the Village of Downers Grove, but they're looking at all our partner governments, from the school district, park district, sanitary district, the township, all those governments, and ensuring that we are working effectively to direct people to different services. I'm not saying we have to necessarily provide the service, but if there's a service to be provided, is there an opportunity for us to work with others, whether that's directly with staff, whether that's a financial support, with another government that's doing it better than us, or perhaps with state government, federal government, where possible. So I think that about covers my items that I'd like to share. And I think the one overarching theme, as we look at all these different items, that's very important to me is engaging residents and doing that in a way that gets community buy-in. So I think there are some items that require a lot more engagement than others, and so we'll have to work through those. But I think that's a theme that runs through every one of these items, whether it's zoning, historic preservation, intergovernmental partnerships with resources, or something like a facilities plan, which is a major project which is going to require major amount of community outreach, as we saw in this most recent plan.
I jump in and offer a very brief annotation about intergovernmental partnerships. Want to answer the question? Okay. When it comes to intergovernmental partnerships, so I'm looking back at what was adopted in 13 to 15. The emphasis seemed to be on the village taking the lead in intergovernmental cooperation, and that's a good thing. But as Mr. Olson said the night we're all sworn in, there's a time for all things. There's a time to lead, and there's a time to follow. And on something like human services, given the demands on our current staff, I think we need to be open to the possibility of supporting, being in a supportive role of another governmental agency that's taking the lead on a more comprehensive nature. And I know the township, for example, is pushing to develop these programs. I mean, we don't have the details making any type of decision, but we should be open to the idea of offering support that would take a minimum of staff time, a modest amount of our budget, and let them carry the ball. And then that way we can provide the services for the entire community. So I would like to change the focus of what was passed in 13-15 a little bit, that lead when it's appropriate, follow when it's appropriate. Fred Astaire needed Ginger Rogers.
Terrific. Well, thank you for everyone's thoughts. If there's a benefit to going fifth, there's a distinct benefit to going last, and that is a lot of topics have been touched upon that I think all in their own way merit some discussion. I think, as was mentioned, that discussion could lead a number of different ways. It could be one direction, it could be another direction. There could be saying that all is well and maintain present course and speed. But I agree that a lot of things have been identified that should be rightfully the topic of discussion. In no particular order, I'll just touch upon and give you my take on some of the things that have already been said, and then add a couple of things of my own. Without a doubt, our priority needs to be, oops, I said the word priority. Without a doubt, the police station issue needs to be addressed. It needs to be addressed in a reasonable time frame because of a number of things. Inflation, money will not be as cheap down the road as it is today. Putting off that problem any further that's already been put off because of a number of different macro events, not the least of which was the Great Recession back in the earlier part of last decade. It's not something that we can allow to really string out. Unlike fine wine, it has not gotten better with age, it's gotten worse. So it absolutely needs to be resolved. And It is my highest, strongest wish that this council comes up with a plan to actually get it resolved. If we can resolve some other facilities issues along the way, terrific, but I think the point of the spear needs to be the police station, without a doubt. In terms of revisiting the comp plan, I think after the first 40 years that we, what was it, 40, 45 years? 40 years that we had one without revisiting it, we swore that we were going to revisit it periodically.
Chairman, a very small comment. I had the great pleasure of reading the comp plan from the 1960s. The line that really stuck out, dealing with Ogden Avenue is a major problem. 1964.
Some things never change. You know, the classics never go out of style. Yeah, I think the original comp plan was 1965, so revisiting that on a regular basis is what is intended to be. And in some respects, it should be built in part of the fabric of the process. The zoning map revisions to address things that we know are problems, I agree that that's something that should and could be addressed. If we're aware, much like if we're aware of people who are interested about whether they're in a floodplain or not, if we're aware of parcels in town that are going to cause us headaches, then we got to take action to address them now before they become headaches. Definitely want to look forward to revisiting and examining tools for enhancing historic preservation in our community. I think we've made a lot of steps, but some things just take time and they have to be done in baby steps. We need to now, we've risen to one level, we need to move to the next level and be able to execute on historic preservation. The tools are there, the platform is there, but we now need to move off that platform to another plane. This community deserves it, and we really need to live up to our motto, which is preserving the balance between tradition and progress. I think I said the day that we passed the sign ordinance that we should revisit it at reasonable points in time. In my opinion, that reasonable point passed a long time ago. But clearly now, after it's coming up on a, what is it, 10-year anniversary, it's time to revisit it. In that respect, I've already started reaching out to the business community and begging them to please fully engage in that process because they are the ones who are most affected by it. Without a doubt, we need to get to, we're almost there, get to and maintain the planned cycle for street maintenance, reconstruction, and whatnot. That was something we set out to do a while ago. We've made tremendous strides in that direction. We need to finish that job. It's not mission accomplished yet. I don't know what anniversary the ethics ordinance is, but it's probably worth looking at that to see whether, with the benefit of a couple of elections now and the passage of time, whether there are things that we've learned that can improve it, or whether it's just working just fine. Like streets, we have a watershed improvement plan. We have a whole bunch of projects that the community is expecting to get done at some point in time. And I think we need to make good on that promise and complete them within some reasonable time frame consistent with our abilities to do so, or if a survey or something else indicates that the community wants that to be accelerated, then we need to figure out how to accelerate it. The point was made that we need to protect our AAA bond rating. Obviously, that's very important because it saves us money down the road. Unfortunately, there are a lot of external factors that could impact that. For example, if the property tax freeze goes into place, it's pretty much a certainty our bond rating will plummet. And that will also cost us money. So there are things that we can control, there's things that we can't control. That kind of leads to my bigger point, which wasn't specifically mentioned, but I certainly said it before, is that, and this is certainly long-range planning, is achieving an independence from Springfield. And that is more of a concept than it is a particular action item, but it's about being less defensive, less reactive, and less dependent upon the whims of what happens in Springfield, whether they be revenue decisions or whether they be mandatory requirements. We need to do whatever we can to enhance our self-determination, improve our local control, and our ability to be our masters of our own destiny, and not have to go into a complete panic freeze every time some goofy bill is floated in the General Assembly. And like I said, that's long-range planning. One of the ways I think we can help do that, by way of a more concrete example, and it was touched upon earlier with the discussion about leveraging governmental partnerships. I think that not just partnering, but I would like to see us identify and actually execute upon one major consolidation, whether it's another public entity or it's a not-for-profit or whatever it is, it could be private. On the scale of what we did with Westmont with the 911 call center, I would like to see us actually do one of those, at least on that scale, within the next 4 years. Those are the ways to achieve immediate savings, through consolidation. For those who may not be familiar with it, when the 911 call center was merged between Westmont and Downers Grove, both communities immediately began saving several $100,000 a year. It's very hard to cut your way into that kind of savings, but through consolidation you can. Just picking up on leveraging intergovernmental partnerships, once upon a time we used to have something called a super retreat, where we actually got together with the leadership of the other taxing bodies in town, or that have boundaries that include Downers Grove, and we talked about what everybody did, what their priorities were, what their challenges were, and how we could work together on a more macro level for the benefit of our shared constituents. We haven't done that in a long time. I would like to do that again. I think that when you get people in a room like this and they start talking about common problems and challenges, sometimes you find out that, you know what, maybe Greg's got something in his toolbox that I don't have. But if he borrows it to me, as I think Bill touched upon earlier, maybe we can get something done that separately we can't. That's not so much a goal as something that I think would facilitate some of the other things that have already been discussed. Just jumping around. Resident survey, I think we discussed whether or not returning. We used to do resident surveys annually, then we started doing them every other year. Maybe it was every other year, I don't remember. It was every other year. We did each side of the town 1 year, that's what we did. I think that would help answer a lot of questions. A properly done survey could answer a lot of questions about what the community really thinks, not what just we all hear in our backyards. Might answer some of that question about resident expectations regarding service levels, regarding right-of-way standards, regarding a whole bunch of things that can inform our budgeting process. It would give us something concrete and less anecdotal to point to. Someone mentioned, Zachary mentioned the meeting and then again here tonight, informing residents about broader issues, not necessarily the context of a particular request or a petition or a problem. We used to have a program, as I mentioned earlier tonight, called At Your Service, and it was kind of designed to do that. I believe one of the topics at one point in time, and Doug will correct me if he's still here, right in front of me, was the infamous road show. We were talking about what the condition of the streets were, why reconstruction took place when it did, why it actually made sense to let a street fail before doing major reconstruction on it, and why that was actually more cost effective than patching it up along the way. But issues like that, it's very hard to explain when they come up in passing. To address those issues and some of the other things that the village does and some of the services it provides and why, I think would be helpful. We have the means, it's just a matter of the programming. Last, I will just say that this has been kind of touched upon by others, and that was, I think somebody brought it up in the context of permitting. I would address it from the standpoint of, we try to pride ourselves on being business friendly and being facilitators and not regulators, and that relates to both businesses and residents. But how do we know that? What kind of metrics can we look at to determine whether we truly are business friendly, objectively and subjectively speaking? Are there ways where we could be responsibly more business friendly so as to facilitate the expansion of economic growth within our community? And that can take a lot of different forms. So the project would be, how do you objectively determine whether you really are deserving of the title business friendly? That could include comparison to other communities, other metrics. I don't pretend to have the answers as I sit here. Then I'll just have to throw it in there as part of being business friendly. If we ever get around to exploring that mobile vendor policy, that would probably be a good way of bringing more business to town.
Need to make sure they pay sales tax.
We can do whatever you want as part of the ordinance. It can be part of the license. That's all I had. I guess what I'll ask is whether anybody has any questions in terms of clarifying what anybody else said. I think I understood what everybody said. I don't know if anyone else had any questions and concerns about at least what it was that was being communicated.
I think it made sense.
All right, so we got a lot of stuff out. I didn't try to count all the bullet points, but there's more than 20.
Well, the good news is we still have a little bit of whiteboard space left, so clearly we can.
I was going to say, the last goal here was buy more whiteboards.
I just have to say, from a staff perspective, this edition of a village council roundtable, just to understand what our policymakers are thinking at the onset of a process, just has been incredibly helpful, and we can already see ways where we will incorporate the ideas and concepts we've heard here tonight as we make our journey through the last 4 meetings, ultimately culminating here. The other thing that struck me is, on our flight analogy, we go all the way to 50,000 feet. And we've struggled to come up with what is truly a 50,000-foot type of item. And Independence from the state absolutely hits the 50,000-foot level from a financial side. I didn't want to say, like, we're seceding or anything like that. That concept of achieve independence from Springfield on a financial level is.
That one might actually be an atmospheric level.
Yes. So we've accomplished a lot here tonight. And I think what's really great is it segues nicely into a discussion of our goals, which is the last thing on tonight's agenda. For those of you who are here with us tonight, we did have a handout that was available as you walked in the room. It's also on our website, and it's the staff materials, staff-produced materials for this evening. And in those materials, in the last couple pages, you will see a write-up of staff's interpretation of these 5 goals that have been in place. So I won't go through them all tonight to explain what we think they meant or the interpretation of the previous council of these 5 goals. I will just rattle them off. Goal number 1 has been that we should be stewards of financial and environmental sustainability. Second goal we've been pursuing for the last 5 years has been that we should provide exceptional municipal services. Next one on the list we spent a lot of time and effort on, and I think the results are evident, top quality infrastructure. The fourth one speaks to all the conversation we've had tonight about economic development. We should have a strong and diverse local economy. Those 4 have been on our list since, or in some way, shape, or form, since I arrived a decade ago this week, actually. And I think Mike and Enzo and others will tell you that these, or a version of these, have been our goals for well past 10 years. One that was added about 5 years ago was this one, that it should be a goal of ours to continually innovate, because innovation drives other things on this list, like exceptional services, like sustainability. So in the last couple of years, we have made it a goal or a priority to be innovators as an organization, and that's where that one came from. What we like to do tonight is make sure that these are the goals, these are literally the 40,000-foot level. Are these the goals we should be considering? And we certainly don't necessarily need to get into a wordsmithing kind of an exercise, because we have plenty of time to do that, and really in this August and September timeframe, it'll all come together. But I do want to offer one to start us off, and that is, many things we've heard tonight speak of things like comprehensive planning, zoning, tree preservation, and I think it relates directly to this August 4th meeting, this concept of real estate development pressures on our neighborhoods. So one concept here is this idea, in all the projects that could potentially end up on our action item list, might want to be an additional goal. I don't know exactly how it comes out and how it's worded, but by the time we get to August and September, that concept, I think, clearly from the council comments tonight is a goal, to address this somehow, or have a plan to address it, or a way to deal with it. So I don't know exactly what those words are, but perhaps we might want to think about that as we look at our list of goals. So with that, Mayor, I will go back over to you.
Just on that point, you reminded me of something, and it may not be adding another goal, it may be just including another element of stewardship. So we have stewardship of financial issues, we have stewardship of environmental issues, and again, I don't have the exact word at my fingertips, but whether it's something about community character or self-image, whatever you want to call it, being stewards of our history and our heritage and our makeup. Again, I'm not sure what the exact words are.
Neighborhood character works just fine. Stewards of neighborhood character.
Right.
You got it right the first time.
So basically, when you're ahead, you should shut up and stop talking. I think it fits under the category label of stewardship.
So I hand it over to the council for any discussion on this. What strikes me is how applicable these 5 goals are to what's on the board. And we said 10 years ago and then 5 years ago that these are longstanding goals for our community, and they seem at first glance to be right in line still today in 2015.
I think so. And 5 is a nice even number, a nice round number. Any further comments or questions from the council? Thoughts?
Kind of an end to the whole thing. You got.
Can't criticize any of my ideas.
I wasn't. I was actually going to praise one. Not you. No. You have all those items on the board. You have the 5 items up there. Could you, as a staff, take all the items that are up there, plug them in one of the 5 items, and then just give it to us as a handout and.
Absolutely.
Sure,
I think it'll fit perfectly in those
And
categories.
that, before we have the next meeting, so.
That's a good suggestion. Also, I heard a lot of things, just in the notes I was taking, that are related.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so maybe bundle the ones that are related, not so that they lose their separate identity, but just at least the ones that are related.
Yes, we can do that.
Because there are some important nuances to things that folks said, but they're in the same zip code. Thoughts,
Yeah,
comments?
One comment,
Sure.
I'm not going to lose a lot of sleep over what the goals list looks like. But the neighborhood character issue, Edwards fiasco notwithstanding, there's been a lot of policy work on that to that end over the last at least 4 to 6 years, whether it be stormwater, the recent change we made to stormwater as it relates to individual site runoff, building code changes as it relates to setback and design standards, traffic calming issues, pedestrian right-of-way issues. There have been a host of things done to that end, and whether it's up there or not, it's been something that this village has put a lot of focus on and needs to continue. And so if it makes the list, great. If it doesn't make the list, it's still got to be something that's in the back of everybody's mind, because it has in fact guided a lot of policy decisions over the last several years.
All right.
Public comment?
I was just going to say, any questions from the audience? And again, the idea is not to judge or prioritize or question the feasibility, practicality, or whatnot of anything, but just any questions about what was said and understanding it. We'll have other meetings where folks can talk about whether there are things that should actually be done or not.
Except you can't criticize any of the mayor's suggestions from what I understand.
I don't have
I
any.
just have a
Sorry.
thing, and that has to do with Commissioner White's point about the sales tax and whatever. I think a big biggest problem is our downtown. We've ignored it since the TIF was in, we redid the streets. Downtown is a disgrace. It's not someplace I'd like to bring my family. Why are we not doing something along those lines that, fix that up, make it more approaching? And the other thing, I'm not sure, if I don't remember correctly, we took away economic development from the Downtown Management Corporation and gave it to the Economic Development Corporation. Is that right? Or if not, it should be.
It was part of the village, it wasn't part of the Downtown Management Corporation.
Who was in charge of creating or luring businesses in the town?
Yeah, there was an EDC department within the village that was part of the village organization, staffed with village employees. That was changed. 06, thank you. In 2006, it was spun off to a separate entity with its own board of directors, its own budget, and its own employees, modeled generally upon similar action that Naperville had taken. Thank you.
Yeah, and I just had a quick point of clarification. I was wondering Mr. Barnett could explain the service level conversation, the lower enhanced. What do you specifically mean by that?
lot of our decision-making stems from, we have, Dave, where is it? If you look at, if you go look back and look at agendas and green sheets, we refer to as green sheets, kind of general write-ups on the subject. One of the guiding targets, goals, if you will, is to evaluate whatever decision happens to be before us, how does it relate to service levels? So the service levels are measured a variety of ways. A real simple, basic one would be, for instance, response time for emergency services. We've made some changes, whether they panned out perfectly or not, I don't remember, but in plow cycles, right? So how long do we take to get to various categories of streets? The amount of time it takes to return a permit or do an approval. There's a variety of metrics we use for everything from public works to administration to public safety to try and measure what the service levels are. And so some of those things I can't imagine any residents are going to say make my ambulance response time longer. But there may be other elements, because I'm not coming up with all of them right now, there's dozens and dozens of them that we measure, where somebody would say, that, okay, this is not a great example, but one that comes to mind. We used to engage far more frequently in delivery of print media information, and we migrated to electronic media. Not exclusively, to be sure, but that's a measurement of service level. At what frequency are we communicating in what vehicle? And so if we don't engage collectively in evaluating what those service levels are, we may be doing things that are either not up to the expectations of our residents or things that we're doing our residents unexpected.
Just to add some color to that, we've been addressing that type of issue since 2009, sometimes directly, sometimes indirectly. In a staff exercise we did earlier this year, we as a staff came up with over 300 distinct services we provide, and we found that in some cases, small changes in service level have big impacts on our financial bottom line, and some of them are the opposite, where big changes don't really affect our finances that much at all. And so Commissioner Barnett and other council members in the last decade have been talking, well, really since 2009, about how formally do we go about looking at those things, how do we measure them, what impact does it have, those types of things.
Yeah, just to pick up on that a little bit further, I think 77% of village expenses are employee related, because it's by definition a service organization. So the question is, what are the service levels the community expects when more than 3/4 of your budget are driven by achieving those service levels? Should it be more or less, same? It's just a question of making sure everybody has the same expectations. Other questions, clarifications, folks in the audience? Please.
Just a comment to sort of throw out to think about, may or may not have merit. By the way, exceptional meeting so far. I mean, great visibility into what's on everybody's mind, so appreciate that. The goals, as you pointed out, seems relevant today as they've always been. The one that sort of strikes me as a little out of whack is the continual innovation, and I think it's absolutely important and important to focus on it, but it seems to be more of a means to the other goals as opposed to an end itself. And I'm wondering if there's some value to, it's important. I mean, it's sort of an operating principle, and I wonder if there's a value to sort of codifying some operating principles, because I kept hearing things repeated. Obviously innovation. I heard a lot of talk about surveying the residents to understand what's real and what's not real. That seems like almost feels like an operating principle. To act off good information, best information that reflects and reflect the needs of our community, wants of our community. I heard about visibility and communication and education; those kind of all fit together. And I'm interested because there seems to be a lot of alignment on some of those kind of operating principles, and maybe there's value to taking at another meeting to sort of jotting them down, see if there's alignment, and codifying them in part of the way you guys do business.
Sure, and some of it's informed by history, because some of these things used to be done, and for various reasons they were discontinued. Budgetary constraints, other pressures. So the question is, we know how to do them, we used to do them. The question is, do we bring them back because they will provide us clearly more value than what their expense is? But good question. Thank you. Anyone else? Well, thank you for all sticking around and coming to join us in the meeting. What next steps are in terms of schedule, which is written there on the board. Vanna, you want to show us?
Yes. Thank you. We have a month to prepare for our next meeting. The first thing we'll do is we'll deliver the request that Commissioner Waldeck made about writing this down, categorizing them under the current goals. What we'll do in between there is prepare for our general fund discussion on July 7th. We'll try to pick up as many issues, comments, and concerns we heard tonight that are relevant here and make sure they are addressed overtly in our planning documents and our preparation. Also, in between these meetings, we do meet individually, staff, with each individual council member to preview the information, to make sure that we've captured what's important to them and to make sure that they've understood what staff is trying to convey and to reflect those things in the staff reports. So the next steps, all those things will happen in the next month, and we will go with another public meeting on July 7th right here in this room.
Terrific.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you very much. Good meeting.